Welcome back to another episode of Root Notes. In this one, we're kicking off a new recurring segment, something that's grown pretty naturally out of years of late-night conversations with friends and colleagues. For years, we've gathered around the fire to talk about books that shape how we see the world, how we do our work, and how we show up in our communities. And sometimes one of us hasn't even read the book, but that's all part of the fun. So we're inviting you to pull up a chair and join us in the conversation. Tonight, we're joined by our good friend, Dr. Adam English, professor, author, and theologian.
And so the book for tonight is The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion by Jonathan Haidt. And what's so interesting about this is I was like, I want to read this, or I want to talk about this book. And our friend and collaborator, Gary Gunderson and TC, are actually the ones that recommended that I read this book. Yeah. And I just read it recently. And when I brought this up to Adam, he was like, that's an old book.
Yeah, I mean, it's like from the 2010s,
it's
right?
2012.
Yeah.
So why read it? Well, I think there's a reason to talk about it in this moment. But before we sort of get into that, like, what's your hesitation about talking about it to start with?
Well,
you had some thoughts
it's from
about that.
2012, and so I guess it's dated in that sense, but it is still tremendously relevant. Jonathan Haidt has gone on and done other research, the coddling of the American mind, an anxious generation. He's worked on kind of generations and younger generations, how they're dealing with stress and iPhones and all this kind of stuff. So his work has moved on beyond this, really. But it does seem like it's maintained a certain relevancy, and it came out in 2012, but precisely because of the 2016 elections, where you've got something approaching 80% of white evangelicals voting for Trump, and then in 2020 those numbers increasing even a little more in 2024. And so it was a kind of a stumper for social scientists, political analysts. How could some of the most moralistic people in the country, vote for Donald Trump, who, has a really bad track record with basic morality? And Jonathan Haidt's work on moral intuitionism, on in-group thinking, and all this kind of stuff really helps to frame and give people some work to think about as they try to make sense of some of those deep polarizations in our country right now.
Yeah, and I think like one of the things that you brought up when I was like, let's talk about Haidt's book, and you were like, I don't know if we should talk about Haidt because he's like controversial. So just to separate that out, like the stuff in The Righteous Mind, I think has a lot of value. Never mind the coddling of the American mind or whatever.
Yes, I mean, the thing is, he's seeing kind of the rise of the university campus protests and sort of the kind of the overly political correct, just like call out culture and this sort of thing, especially with online shaming and all this kind of stuff. So he's kind of trying to figure that out, especially in the coddling of the American mind, trying to figure out, where's this coming from? Yeah. Of course, what's happened is you have, again, back to Donald Trump, who is attacking the Department of Education and university grants and this kind of stuff, and shutting down DEI offices, and so one could, and I certainly don't think this is his intention, Haidt's intention, but you could certainly use his work as intellectual grounding for some of the policy that Trump is working on right now, and some of those actions, and so. I feel like I don't want it to feel like, well, we're doing hate because somehow we're endorsing this other aspect of things.
Right.
And we certainly want to separate those two things out.
Yeah, sure. I had this sociology course that was incredible when I was doing my doc work. And we read a book a week, and the objective was to play the believing game. That is, what would it mean if the author's rhetorical goals in this book were true? Yeah. Like, what would it mean to take it as valuable? And so one of the things that I think is really interesting in this post-pandemic reality for public health, where I don't think the pandemic necessarily changed the reality, but it brought into very stark relief some of the challenges with doing work in communities that were already very polarized.
Yeah.
I think that this book has a lot to say about that space, maybe even more to say about that space than it's been dealt with so much in terms of politics. But I think for folks who might be interested in this discussion, it's that piece. So I'm curious, if you were to play the believing game, like what's the argument for still talking about this book from 2012, 2013?
Yeah, so I move forward, what makes it still relevant? I mean, maybe we should back up and say what made it interesting in 2012 even. It became a New York Times bestseller even at that time.
Yeah.
But in many ways, the premise of his work really goes back to the late 70s. So think about Richard Dawkins, E.O. Wilson, Peter Singer. All these guys are working on morality, especially especially thinking about altruism. You're thinking about cooperation as adaptive features in the human species. That we do these things as survival techniques, basically. And then the other side of it, when we think about moral indignation, when we think about purity codes, when we think about shaming and all ostracization, these are also ways of enforcing kind of cooperation and altruism and these sorts. So they're doing all this kind of work, in the late 70s, early 80s, and it's only kind of grown. And somebody like Haidt comes along and is able then to apply that work to kind of current social, political realities and lets people see, like, okay, yeah, this really helps frame what I'm seeing now, that we're thinking about morality. We're not really searching for the truth and, the good and the evil. A lot of times we're expressing kind of deep-seated taboos, feelings of disgust or empathy, and a lot of in-group work. That we're saying this because this is part of my team, and this is what makes us us, and not you. And so, I think there's a sense in which we're really starting to understand the dynamics of ethics and morality in these broader biological ways that are, they are socially constructed, but also deeply rooted in our biology. Yeah. And so he's able to do that.
So you're not saying that this is a framework for, or are you saying this is a framework potentially for understanding tribalism?
Yeah. This combined with Joshua Green's work and some others that really, really worked on tribalism. Exactly that. And tribalism's not a moral evil. It's basically the way humans survive. We get together, we find people who can support us, who can help us, who can nurture us, who can be family to us, and we become loyal to those people. And your loyalty to that group now becomes the dominant driver of your interactions with everybody and everything. So you're going to protect your group, my people, my family, my house, against outsiders, but also against infidels on the inside, right? So, I think if you start thinking of it in that way, which is tribalistic, but it's, it's also kind of just this basic human biology, I guess, if you will.
So this is an evolutionary framework, or at least it's built off of an evolutionary framework.
Very much.
But, I guess the question I have, and we might be jumping ahead, he probably answers this in the book, is one of these things where, tribalism has a function. It's not a good or bad, it just is.
Right.
But tribalism is also exclusionary by nature. But the whole sort of problem is tribalism. And so how do we expand the tribe?
Expand the tribe, yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of the question in my mind.
And that's Peter, again, that goes back to the 80s, right? Peter Singer's the expanding circle, right? The whole idea of morality should be to try to expand that circle. I would combine it with, I think that was one of the real big insights of kind of evolutionary biology and sociology, certainly this in-group dynamic, in-group, out-group dynamic. Then combine that with the work that Kahneman and Tversky and others have done on thinking fast and thinking slow. That our basic wiring is to try to assess things as quickly as possible. So you go into the grocery store, you need to make instant assessments of what's happening there. And then sometimes you pick up something off the shelf and you can really stop and think about what you're buying, right? But most of the time we're hardwired to see things, instantly recognize them as, a dog, a cat, a tree. And so we do the same thing with people. I recognize that person. You recognize their skin color, their age, their gender, their social status instantly.
Yeah.
And so if you combine my in-group bias with kind of my fast-thinking bias to kind of quickly identify outsiders and insiders, then suddenly you have a recipe not only for obviously a rich community of people who love each other and support each other, but also a real tribalism that is partisan and exclusionary and all that kind of stuff too.
Hey there, just a quick pause to say thank you. The response to Root Notes over the past few weeks has really been incredible. If you're enjoying this, one of the best things you can do is leave a quick rating or a review. It helps more people find us, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of conversation really does matter. All right, let's get back to it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's in this book that's a little bit different than some of that other stuff that's being discussed in other places is that he spends some time really going through the way in which our morality is intuitive. It's not reasoned. And sort of the reasoning comes after that. And one of the ways in which he does this is to sort of walk through all of these sort of taboo examples. And the book develops this in more and more complex ways, but just gives these little stories and then just has people sort of respond to it and then ask people why. And it's really interesting as they make the experiment more and more complex, people still figure out a way to explain it. But really what they're doing is just responding to like, yeah, that doesn't sit right. This doesn't feel right. An example is, he gave lots of examples, but so somebody takes an old American flag that you would destroy anyway. And prior to destroying it, uses that cloth to clean their bathroom. And then disposes of it in a respectful way.
Oh, wow.
Is that wrong? And just have people go like, yeah, that's wrong. Why? Well, let me figure out why. Because it's wrong first.
Right. It feels wrong.
It feels wrong first.
Yeah.
And I think that's so helpful.
Yeah.
So, I think that's really helpful in doing community work, because a lot of times, for instance, in public health work, and Wes and I are trying to educate, future leaders in public health, and we spend a lot of time helping them be able to make better arguments. And then, during COVID, as I'm working with communities that are resistant to the vaccine, the arguments that were being made through reason didn't really matter.
That's right.
What kind of arguments were, so people were saying to you, I don't trust the vaccine. I don't want to take it.
Well, sure.
What were they adding to that?
But I think the whole point of the book is it didn't matter what they said after that.
Yeah, but if they were saying something to you, right?
Yeah, but here's what I'm saying about this book. This is why I think this book is so crucial for our moment in community health work and community development work. Because I think that what's being argued in this book is that you have this moral intuition and then you go in search of a reason and then you provide it. So whatever you tell me after that, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
What you're actually responding to is, for whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think that what the book suggests as a better response to trying to do this work across that divide is relationship.
Yeah.
Because with the relationship, you might just go, not ick. You might go, okay.
Yeah, if it's somebody
and
you know. Sure.
What might have happened there is no real exchange of facts.
Yeah.
It just it has a different intuitive response. And in fact, in the book, he talks about morality being like a taste bud.
Yeah.
And you just might be able to give people the taste of, taste for it, rather than trying to reason through it. Because the truth is, maybe all of us are just creating reasons to validate wherever we're at intuitively.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
But you do realize that we spend most of undergraduate and graduate education talking about evidence-based, right? Evidence-based decision making, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I teach courses in health promotion, and we talk about education. We talk about giving information, being factual, that sort of thing. And we do not spend nearly the amount of time on that sort of thing as we do. What's the evidence say? Well, the evidence doesn't matter. What matters is actually who's saying it and what they mean to you, who they are to you.
Well, and here's what I would say. The evidence does matter.
It does.
But it doesn't matter to convince people.
No.
It matters
it's not
because
gonna.
it helps you understand where you should be as the professional voice.
Right.
Right? So for instance, you all know Amy Hinkleman, who's this immunologist that did a lot of this vaccine work with me in very vaccine hesitant communities, including in churches, right? And we would go in, and she is incredible at being able to translate science for the masses. But I would argue it didn't matter that much.
Better not tell her.
No, I've told her this. Like, I don't think it hurts anything.
Sure.
But I think anybody that ended up being convinced from their experiences with us, it had more to do with Amy at the dinner
they felt
before
like
the
cared.
thing.
Oh, sure.
Her personality.
Sure, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
it was that, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, I trust her.
I got to know that you care before I can care what
you've heard this.
know.
You've heard the whole saying, right? Like, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
But I think we mostly thought about that as like a elementary school thing.
We did.
And I think it's a human thing.
Yeah, that's probably true.
In fact, Amy and I did some vaccine hesitancy research where we had almost 1,000 people in rural North Carolina as the rollout was happening of the vaccine. So this is back in 21. Respond to a survey and just tell us, like, what are you thinking about the vaccine and why? Have you gotten the vaccine yet? Do you intend to get the vaccine? What people told us, interestingly, was that people who were either had already gotten the vaccine or were intending to get the vaccine, the most likely reason they said that they were is because a healthcare provider that was their own suggested it.
Well, research holds that out, though. I mean,
That's what I'm saying. Like, so what does that mean? Does it mean that the healthcare provider that's my own is giving me the best argument? No. It's just relationship.
Yeah.
It's just a relationship that sort of overrides facts.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, when you talk to people about where they get their health information, right? Like, if they're honest about it, it's social media is a big part of it, but it's also friends and family. And somewhere on that list, they might talk about, an expert. But if they have a close relationship with a provider, they'll list that.
And that's what's so amazing about this data to me is that we gave them the chance to say social media. We gave them the chance to say politicians. We gave them the chance to say a whole bunch of other people. Mm-hmm. And what they said is like, well, the healthcare provider that I trust. So where do facts matter then? That healthcare provider has a great responsibility.
Yeah.
Amy has a great responsibility to be right if you build trust with people and then tell them things.
Yeah, and there's the catch right there.
Yeah.
To be right.
Yeah,
and
you better be right.
You better be right.
Yeah, you better be right.
Because you have a lot of trust. In
right.
your hands.
But there's a scalability problem with that, right? Like, I can build 1 relationship, 2 relationships, 10 relationships. How do I scale that
make it
to the
systemic
community, right? And I think that's the work, that's the question, which we may or may not have already explored by this point.
Well, the thing is, every time we ask the scalability question, we're assuming that there is such thing as a scalable answer to this. Is there? We don't. I would argue that we have overestimated that. Yeah, right? And so I think the question becomes, if, for instance, you're talking about the function of sort of like national messaging, maybe the function of national messaging is to support the people who are likely to be trusted instead of trying to convince people who are likely to mistrust national messages.
Yeah, maybe so.
You know what I mean? But I do think, getting back to the book though, he also suggests some ways that we could be like moral multilinguists. Because one of the things that is sort of dealt with in the book is that there are these 6 areas of sort of moral foundation. And that a lot of the messaging on the left only really appeals to 2 of those. Care and...
all the ones I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Yeah.
To
I mean, I can make one up. I haven't read the book.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Care
I'll look it up in a second.
Fairness, I think is one.
Yeah, I think it's care and fairness.
Care and fairness, yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, I'll look it up in a second. But anyway, so on the left side, you're only really appealing to 2.
Yeah.
And what he calls the conservative advantage is that it appeals to all 6. Things like loyalty, things like the sacred, things like authority. And what's interesting on a couple of levels with that to me is that I don't think we do enough work in training, for instance, future public health leaders and going, okay, how do you communicate across with a deep respect and humility towards people who are valuing something that's a moral good that's just different than the one that animates you.
Right.
And I think that's...
And not demonize it in the process.
Right.
Yeah, to me, that's the hard work, because it always feels like, that conversation feels almost a lot of times just one directional. Like the virtue of tolerance is tolerating people who are intolerant, but rarely is the intolerant person, being required to tolerate the tolerant people.
So
okay,
it is 5 things.
And he's actually expanded it to 6.
Okay,
now.
I thought it was 6.
Yeah, but maybe not in that book. I think it's 5.
So it looks like it's care, fairness, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. I got really close there, actually. I think I did say all these things.
You probably did.
We can check the tape.
But what ends up happening, I think you're right, and I think that's been the critique since the publication of the book, is that like this is sort of overburdening one side of the spectrum to accommodate the other side. Yeah. But I'm not really interested in the political aspect of that.
Okay.
What I'm interested in is at the community level. If we're trying to build bridges between people who might mistrust.
Yeah, but who's the we that's building the bridge? I mean, that's the problem.
Is it? What's the problem? Name the problem.
Well, I say, if we're trying to build bridge, who's this we that's building
people who are interested in the health of the entire community.
But there are lots of people who are interested in the health of the community.
I think like a lot of people
that do not think or agree.
That's just
the same way. Like right now, we're literally, rolling back mandates on vaccinations, and the people that are doing that believe in the health of the community.
Yeah, they think
according to this framework, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've got our own county right now is considering removing fluoridation from the water, and they're thinking it very seriously. And I'm sure in their hearts they're saying, we think we're doing the right thing for our community. And you know what I mean? Like, so they are the we that's saying we are going to come in and help build this bridge to help you understand that fluorination is a terrible thing in the water.
Right. Is that right? I think
you'll be thinking this one day when your teeth fall out.
You articulated a different problem. When I said we should build bridges, and you said who was the we? And I said the people who are interested in the health of the whole community. And then you started naming other people. If you're interested in the health of the whole community and you're interested in building these bridges, right? That's who I'm talking about.
Right.
It doesn't matter which of those 2 things you start from, right? So if you're interested in convincing me that the fluoride needs to be taken out of the water, and I'm interested in convincing you that fluoride should remain in the water, right? Which is the reality in which we live.
Right.
My point is, let's get better at appreciating the values that you're speaking from and being able to communicate into those values instead of talking past each other from the values that are animating me. When you're speaking from values, for instance, if your value is freedom, which is a good, and I'm speaking from the value of care, which is a good, and I'm not able to translate into like, okay, well, help me take your framework seriously. Like, help me understand what the value that's motivating you, and then figure out how that sits with my own sort of moral frame. I don't think we do enough of that, and it doesn't matter where you're starting from.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. This is a bidirectional sort of thing. It doesn't matter whether or not I'm coming from, the perspective of a professional in the evidence base, or someone is coming from the community that has a genuine concern that may not fit at all with my understanding of the evidence.
Right.
It doesn't matter where you start.
Doesn't matter where you
the
start.
process essentially would be the same. And
Yes.
in theory, I guess, would end up in the same place.
Well, I mean,
regardless
you're predetermining
of which way
where
you
it would end up, right? But what I'm saying is, like, by saying it would end up in the same place, I don't know where it ends up. But what I'm saying right now is talking past each other isn't getting us anywhere.
No. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the big issues being brought up in the book, is that we've got to be better at being able to speak into and hear from the values that are motivating other people better, even if those things aren't the primary motivating values for ourselves.
Okay.
And to get to data from the book before I leave this point.
Please.
Data from the book suggests that, particularly on the left, if you're saying, well, this is overburdens the left is particularly bad at being able to understand the motivations of people on the right.
Probably
and that's demonstrated in the data.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a certain burden that our friends who are on the left might have to be better than that, to better understand people.
Okay, but I will take that for granted. But, okay, if my task is to attempt to better understand this person with whom I do not share a worldview at all, and I'm trying to do this, if we really start to take this work on like taboos and kind of intuitive ethics seriously, it's very likely that the person themselves doesn't really know what perspective they're coming from. I mean, the whole idea of a disgust response is that moral dumbfounding is it's coming from a place that you haven't really articulated yet.
Yeah.
So the idea of drinking out of a water fountain that a person of color is drunk out of, or mixing Aryan blood, or in India, having people of different castes touch each other, evoking these strong, or eliciting these strong, responses of disgust. And you might say, well, why did you react that way? And well, because it's just wrong, it's just gross, it's whatever. But they wouldn't really be able to articulate it in the moment, and then they go back and try to work on it, maybe come up with some reasons. But so how are we gonna build that bridge when the person themselves doesn't really know kind of what it is that they...
Think about what you're not learning from the book by saying that.
Okay, tell me. It's been a while since I've read the book, actually.
It's been a long time since I've read it. Maybe never. Yeah.
This might be about David Tillman educating
You probably
us.
read it last night just to
that's right.
brush up.
No, I mean, I've read it more recently than you, and I've read it, so there's that for you.
Right.
But no, I think you're getting back to like, how can I sort of reason through this with somebody who hasn't sort of been able to make it explicit for themselves?
Right. Yeah, that's my question.
Who said anything about trying to reason through it with them?
Well,
That's
somebody
the whole point.
says that's gross. I mean, where do we go with that?
right, because if the
Where
idea...
do you go with that?
Right. And so I think it becomes... I think the answer would be, maybe it's in the book, that if we truly practice right and make it a habit of working through that framework of trying to understand, then you're modeling that in the conversation, right? So it's sort of a real-time modeling of, I'm trying to understand your motivations. If I ask you questions in a genuine sort of desire to know, then you can respond and maybe sort of ask the same questions in a conversation, right? Like, is that a way in which this unfolds?
And I guess what I'm suggesting is the meeting of humans can happen without the meeting of minds. And the mind's gonna follow anyway, is what I'm trying to say. So if getting back to the whole example with Amy, translating the science, and she did an amazing job, and I'm certainly not discounting that, but I think mostly people responded to the human That's the thing.
That's the thing.
That's the thing. So, like, just sort of turning this back to like the folks who may be interested in this podcast. Like, why read this book? I mean, you read.
I think of a lot of reasons that I want to read it.
You read moral philosophy all the time. You're an ethicist. You're a theologian. You're head of a Christian studies department. Like, this is where you live. Many of the people that we work with, the people that we encounter in our work, the future public health leaders that we're educating, they're not reading the same shelf of books that you're working from. But I really think this one that sort of bridges that space is valuable. What would you, if you were going to kind of summarize how this might be helpful to people if they chose to do what Wes hasn't done and read it?
Wait, I think it's exactly what you're talking about, which is the bridge building.
Yeah.
That is, the more we can become self-aware of our own moral reasoning, our own moral thinking, our own identities, the more likely we'll be able to, have conversations with other people who are different and recognize those differences and try to build some bridges. And yeah, absolutely. So it's about being self-aware and being other aware. And I feel like, these are two great tasks in the human life, to be at home in your own skin and learn to live with other people. And so, this I think is a critical book, because I think a lot of people are wondering about people on the right, left, in the middle, and uneducated, they can see the polarization in our country. They can see the divides. They can see the disconnects, and they're shaking their heads. And sometimes the question might be, what is wrong with them? Yeah. And sometimes it's what is wrong with the world? What's wrong with us that we can't figure this out? So I think this is a critical tool, one of the many critical tools to help people get some answers to that question. How do we get here? How do we get beyond it? The U.S. is in we're in a difficult place right now. And other countries, I was just talking to somebody today who just got back from Australia, and which is not quite as polarized as here. And they're looking at it, and they can see the polarization, and they realize that this story can go a lot of ways, but it might not end well for us. Just because of these sharp divisions. And so we feel it, and we've got to sort of find ways to handle it. And I maybe that's the one thing that is encouraging, if you will, that people I hear from the right and left, middle, and they're all starting to diagnose kind of a similar problem, which is this deep polarization, and have there's some genuine good faith efforts. How can we overcome this? It'll be interesting to see.
I mean, maybe there is some unity in the dislike of the discomfort, right? I mean, maybe there is some sort of place to start that says, look, you might not trust the other side, but both sides feel this tension. We don't want to live in this forever, right? Wouldn't it be great if we could find a way to diffuse it, to bridge it, and just start there, right? With a genuine sort of, I don't want to feel this way anymore. And you don't either, right? So at least we have a common place to start.
And this whole argument that he's making out of theory and data, it has face validity for me. Like, my work in communities make this idea that if we approach people who disagree with us, assuming that they have the best intentions, not the worst intentions, but have the best intentions, and are motivated by deeply held values that I could also recognize as values.
Right.
That has led to being able to move forward really important work in communities across divides. And so he's bearing it out in data. It's a really interesting theory. Like, the discussion in the book is compelling. And I would just say, working on these kind of issues on the ground, it feels like truth. And I think it is hopeful in the way that you've suggested.
It's really good.
Well, I'll make the maybe closing or final point that we are quickly becoming an audio-only podcast. It's getting pretty dark.
It'll be audience.
Well, they've followed us through the
if you got to this point.
If you got to this point,
You're probably reading the book.
You're like, you know what? I'm just going to read the book. This is boring. Let me just get the book.
Thanks, Adam. This was fun.
This was fun.